Umbrella murdered over.
Okay, good evening, everyone. This is going to be my second stream for today, and this is going to be a long project. I have this issue with, well, most of the inbuilt delays I've ever used. I'm just going to move my mic down a bit. Hopefully, they'll give you a better sound. Most of the inbuilt delays I've ever used, I think, are faulty, and I would like to fix them. And I'll go into why that is. Should be pretty simple to explain. I'll just check that I've got that stream working correctly, which I have. Fantastic. Did I? Here I did. Doing this with one computer, so it's twice as complicated now. So, yeah, why do I think most delays are faulty? Well, it's not too difficult. The major problem is that they all change the gain of the dry signal when they're not at 100% dry, which is, well, not all of them, but a lot of them do. So, for example, the inbuilt one that comes with PreSonus, the nice and light one, if it's a 50% mix, then I lose gain. Exactly the same is true in Ableton Live with the ping pong delay in there. If it's a 50% mix, then the dry loses gain. And I'll demonstrate that to you now. So keep an eye down here in the mixer at this clap signal. And by all means, try this in your sequencer's native delay. And you see that's coming in at just over -12 dB. We'll check it one more time, just over -12. There you go. And now look what happens when I turn on delay. So 50% mix. It now comes in under -12. And you may say, oh, so, okay, what's the big deal with that? Well, let's say you've got a delay on your channel and you've mixed it. And you're at a late stage in the mix. You're thinking about actually doing a full-on mix down. And you've set your channel. You're going to be mixing it in and you want to control the delay because you want to control the apparent depth of the channel in the mix. Well, that's great. But if I touch that mix dial, then that means that the gain of the dry signal changes, which means that the signal, the apparent signal depth, where that part is sitting in the mix, will be completely changed by the fact that the gain is now, of the dry signal is now louder, even if I'm changing the mix of the dry to wet. It's just fucked. It doesn't make sense. Why would you design a delay to do that? And I'll tell you why, because it's a lot quicker and a lot easier. But not that much quicker and easier, I've got to say. It's like, well, we'll go into it in Reaktor and I'll show you how you can do that. And it's a question, it's an open question to designers of the plugins you get with DAWs. Why have you done it like this? Because now loads of people will be using that in a project and they can't easily. And so that means that the people like Ableton and Presonus can't easily change that plugin without involving like legacy modes or re-releasing it under a different name. Because if they just change the mix control of their plugin to work correctly, essentially, and not fuck with the signal in a stupid way, then that will change the sound of people's projects. And parts will then be mixed at a different level, which is the whole fucking problem. So it's a bit of a catch-22 for them. The only way they can really get around it is if they have a legacy mode for their plugins and engage legacy mode for projects before a certain date. It's not ideal. And all for the sake of literally a few minutes at the coding stage. Yeah, not good. So, I really do need to sort out my delay needs. I'm not particularly happy with the inbuilt delay of the program. I do like one of the delays in Guitar Rig 5, but what's happening is I'm just perpetually overusing that delay. And it's sort of a real character delay. Very, very thick, very, very space dominating mix. And I'd rather have more strings to my bow, put it like that, more flexibility. So I'm going to jump into Reaktor and I'm going to build my own. And we're not going to do this sort of over one session. This is going to be a long-term goal. I'm not sure how many sessions it will take. And for today, I'm just going to chuck in a Reaktor and we're going to crack on with it. We're going to think about audio routing today and what features we want in a basic delay. And then as we get that right, we'll move on and we'll do something more like a ping pong delay. And then maybe we'll have a look at different sorts of delay beyond that. So it's going to take a little time. But hopefully at the end of it, however long that may be, hours and hours away from now, I will have my dream delay. It's not going to be a quick process though. I imagine I'll be frustrated. And you're going to see me puzzling about it and not getting it right and fucking up the maths and all sorts of things. It should be a giggle. Should be a giggle. So, first of all, I'm going to start with my inputs and outputs here. So I've got my left channel. And left is always number 1 in Reaktor. And right is always number 2. So let's just do that and make that a little bit clearer straight off the bat. And we'll do the same thing with our outputs too, just to keep it nice and clear. The start zoom means to go on without fucking up or anything like that. So, just to give you an example of what I think, or I suspect most of our manufacturers have done, which if we go to signal path here, in Reaktor speak, what they've done, and it's not quite the same, is essentially they've used one multiply. Well, no, they've done a linear crossfade. So at the middle point of their crossfade, you lose 6 dB of gain. You lose half the signal, essentially. And there's much better ways of doing that. So let's jump onto properties of this. So this is effectively what they've done. And it's just like a DJ crossfade. just like a DJ. Well, not just like a DJ crossfade, because DJ crossfades are normally built a little better than that. But it's essentially the same principle as DJ crossfade. You start at full multiplication on one side of the fader, and as you move through the fader, you gradually drop the multiplication until you end on no multiplication on the other side of the fader, so the signal's gone. And that's linear multiplication there. And that's exactly what they've done, which is great for some situations, but not if you're trying to do a fade. And actually, the easiest way to fix it is just to jump up to 3 ports. So we're going to make, just for argument's sake, we're going to make a simple example using a very simple delay. In fact, I don't even need to use a delay. I could do this just using numbers. So I'm going to add constants. I'm going to call that 1. So if I now grab a control, I'll grab a knob and attach that in. And that's going to be right. So, and we'll get a level meter here. I'll make this mono. This is all just sort of quick stuff. We're making a very quick and dirty check. So you now see that this knob will go from position 0 to position 1. And at halfway, we will have half the signal, which is the behaviour you see in Ableton Live's ping pong delay, and it's the behaviour you see in the analog delay in PreSonus, or very similar behaviour to that, but it's not the behaviour I want. So I'm halfway around, pretty much, and I'm pretty much at half signal, and I get all the way around. So I'm in position 1 on this scanner now, and I get silence. I don't get this signal at all. And if you imagine that was actually an oscillation going in there, it's exactly the same thing in exactly the same way. So how would I get that to be working correctly? Well, actually, it's quite simple. I add, this is one way of doing it. You can also do much the same thing using min and max, but this is a simple way of doing it, I think. I think it's a little bit clearer. Now, just for argument's sake, I'm going to make this 0, just so you can see what I'm doing. There's another way of doing it. I'll change this knob. I'm now going to make that 2. So now this will go through position 0, 1, and 2. And you'll see at 50%, this will now have a value of 1. By 50%, the middle value 1, yep, the knob is in 50% position. Now it's a value of 1. I'm not precisely on 1. If I make it 1, there you go. So nothing happens to the middle point, and then from the middle point on, the original value fades out to nothing. Doesn't that make a lot more sense? Doesn't that make a lot more sense on a mix knob, on a delay? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but the only way I can use this delay without changing the gain of the main channel is to set the mix at 100% and have it on a send channel. That's not how I use delay. I know a lot of people do. Fantastic. Happy for you. That's great. Whatever works for you, perfect. Do that. But that's not how I use delay. And if that is how I should use delay, why have a mix knob there at all? Okay, so enough of me knocking Ableton and PreSonus for the shittiness of their inbuilt delays. That's how simple it would have been for them to not make a shit delay. That simple. What can I tell you? So we're going to use that, and that's going to be our mix knob, but we'll get onto that. What I immediately need to do is we're going to think about the actual audio signal and how we want this to work today. So we're going to make a new macro. And the nice thing is we can do bits and pieces that are primary level, as they call it, which are things like this, old style reactor units. And we can make a core level and use some more modern stuff. And we will do that because there's a specific filter I'd like to use in there for various reasons. And we're not going to have to actually sort of create too much really low level stuff. There's a load of stuff in there that we can just use straight off the bat, which will be ideal. But the first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of this knob. I don't need that. But I quite like to keep the plus signal and the selector because I am going to use them. So oh no, I can't do keyboard shortcuts in this mode. I'll copy them and then I'm going to dump them in here. I'm going to call this mix. So this would be the first part of our chain. And we're just going to work, instead of working in stereo, we're going to work on one channel and then if necessary duplicate it. Although I think I have a sneaky way of doing that, which you may have seen before. And we need some inputs and outputs. So let's jump down into our built-in modules. We need an import, which will be in, and we need an output, which will be the out. And essentially this is going to be dry signal, so I'll connect that up. This is going to be our very last port. And then the out from that is going to go out. So what else might I want to do with this delay? A lot of drop frames. I hope I'm still here. Let me check myself, guys. Yeah, I'm here.
Umbrella murdered over
My phone is lying. It says I went offline. Useless. Useless. Let's come back to life now. Okay, let's hope it all holds together. I'll tell you what I am going to do. I'm going to hit start recording as well. Hopefully now it should all hang together, and even if it doesn't, then I'll have a record of what the hell's going on. Okay, so back to what I was doing. So this is my, just in case it does all screw up, I'm going to get rid of all that. Delete. So I'm going to call this audio process. And I separate out the audio process and the front panel elements. So I think of it as like the panel on a synth. I keep that as one macro, and then behind that I've got the audio process, and I keep that as another macro. That's how I work anyway. It was reassuring when I spotted that they're doing something similar-ish in blocks. I quite like that. But the other thing I like to do on some delays, and it's there on the Space Echo, and it's not there on many others, is I like to have an input mute button, an automatable input mute button. So that means that I can turn off the input into the actual delay feedback loop. So the input comes in, and at the point where it goes into the feedback loop, I could mute that. So the dry input goes on through, but I can choose whether I actually send any signal at all of that dry input into the feedback loop on an automatable button. So that means that if I was playing an entire thing, I could choose to turn on the delay at the end of a phrase and get just the end of that phrase going through the delay, which can be a really, really cool effect. And I can have a huge delay without it getting muddy because I just put the end of it through. So at that would be another one of these selectors, because if I have a switch, then there could be a click when I turn it on, and I don't want that. I want it to be a little bit more controlled than that. I'll copy that and I'll paste that. and I'll call it input mute. So as you can see, there's not going to be a lot of sound today, but we'll get there. It's going to take a lot of time. Input mute is kind of an on-off thing. So I only want 2 ports on this. There we go. And only port 1 is connected. What is a little different is that this is going to be a little toggle switch. This is going to be like a button, but the input to that has to go through a slew limiter, or as they call it in this, an event smoother. There we go. So that means that it won't click. It won't just immediately sort of jump to the next value. There'll be a slight blur as it goes through, which will mean there won't be a click. And that's going to need a little input. We'll call that a receive. So this is going to come from my interface macro. I'm going to call that in mute, just so it's nice and clear. Port 1 on this receives no input, so it goes from dry signal to nothing. And that's going to sit there like that. And we might have to look at the way round the button is. It might be that we need to connect it to port 1 or port 0. It can be funny making sure that you hit the switch and it lights up the right way. You don't want it to be lit the wrong way. So not dropping any more frames. That's good. I'm paranoid about that now. Let's save the project at this point. And I'm going to go into Twitch Ensembles and I'm going to call this delay. Let's call it super delay. Why not? And so we need to think about our actual delay in this process. I mean, that seems to be the next logical thing to think about, doesn't it? Is the actual delay. And we are going to go for a single delay. And I want high quality interpolation on this. And the output is going to go into our single delay. And then we've got to be pretty careful about how this works. I personally like it. This is something we could configure. Now, personally, I like it when the delay is always processed by the filter at least once. So otherwise, if you set a low pass filter, we'll go into it, I'll explain it. So new core cell, because I want to use a very specific low pass filter. In the library in audio and filter, we are going to use I would like to use an SVF filter on this, I believe. Yeah. I'm going to use a nonlinear SVF. So let's make sure that that's all connected up. That's the input. I'm only going to take the low pass output from this. It's an expensive filter. And I could make it multi-mode, but that's not actually what I'm trying to do in this case. The reason I want it is because it has in here, we jump in here, it will have somewhere saturation. There we go. You see that sat level? That means that there's a tanh saturation in here somewhere. I'm not sure where it is precisely, but it will be in here. And that's useful to me There we go, 10H saturators. That's useful to me because it means I can throw a signal in there super hot and it won't clip. It will just cope with it essentially. These don't need to be any more than event level things. I'll label them up so it's clear. I don't need to change the saturation level here. I can just change the volume to create more drive. Pick up sample rate. And that would be useful. That little thing there, that means I can get signals out and create other things like all pass filters if I wanted to. But we're not going to, I'm going to use all pass filters in this, but not in that way. And that's pretty much all we have to do for the low pass filter. So we'll call this low pass, which is nice and clear. I'll just readjust myself because my leg is going to sleep. Ugh. I knew I shouldn't have streamed in this room. Bad call. It jumps into here. And I'm going to use a basic standard filter, a primary as they call it, filter. And we're going to go for a two-pole high pass. Oh, there is something else I want to do. With filters, I tend to quite heavily use MIDI pitch to scale the filter. I find that much easier. It makes the knob behaviour feel about right rather than having to sweep through a huge useless area. So for that, what I'm going to do is in here, there will be convert, and I want pitch to frequency. I'm going to plug that in and plug that in. There we go. And I'm going to rename the input pitch. Just a P, that'll do. I'll understand what that means. And then the output of that goes into the next two-pole filter, which is the high pass filter. And that's our filtering done, essentially. Now, at this point, I'm going to add that into the mix. So let's get a little terminal on that. Receive. And we'll call that mix. The reason I'm sending it from there is if I don't send it from this point after the filters, then the first delay will be not filtered. It'll be exactly the same, it'll have exactly the same frequency content as the original audio, which probably will never be what I want. But like that, I nearly always prefer to have the signal at least a little filtered. Now all of these controls potentially will need knobs on the panel. I tend not to want a lot of resonance, so maybe we'll leave them for now, but we'll put in some terminals for the cutoff because I will definitely want to receive cutoff. And that's going to be HP cut. And low P cut. And we're not going to do any of the maths here. We're going to keep this schematic, the macro, pretty light as much as we can. So it's easy to read, kind of understand what's going on. And then we'll sort of drill down or away to the GUI panel and do a lot of our maths there. And I want another receive here, and we'll call this D time. That seems pretty clear. So at this point, what's going to happen is that the signal comes back round and into the delay. So immediately I made a mistake because the input to the delay clearly needs at least one more bit of adding, because I need to add two signals together, the original dry signal and the feedback signal. They all need to go together. Like that. And there is one more unit I wish to put in, although we may leave that for now. But the other unit I'll put in, and I'm going to put it in just to remind myself that I want it to be there, is a diffuser delay. And this is essentially a glorified all pass filter. I'm just going to leave that there for now. And we're going to use this to smear our delay out, essentially. Okay, so from here, let's put in another add just to make the feedback loop a lot clearer. There we go. That is essentially the start of our delay, and we can sort of fake out some of it and make sure that it's working correctly. That's the time in milliseconds. Let's make that, if I make this 500 milliseconds, then that'll be a half-second delay, and we should see whether it works or not. The other thing that I'll need to do is have a feedback knob. So there we go, that's something we can do. Multiply. And I want a smoother. And I'll set this as a constant just for now at 0.5. And that can go in there. And that's a little bit clearer. Delete. I don't think it will let me rename that, unfortunately. No. No. Never mind. This is feedback, essentially. We need to sort of prank some of these values. If I set this to 60. Well, no, probably 100 is going to be a little bit clearer. And I won't set the high pass one, we'll leave that blank for now. Okay, let's see if we can get a signal working through here. Let's enable wire debugging to see where the signal is not getting through. So we're not getting signal from the actual sequencer. That's because I've deleted that clap. There we go. So now we're getting signal into the effect. And just for now, I'm just going to run this as a mono signal. And stop it being annoying in one ear, I'm going to put on a binaural pan and kill the width. There we go. And that'll keep me sane. So signal's getting in there. The signal's not getting through here. So we're going to start making our GUI panel. And I want a button, I think it would be called. There we go. And I'm going to call that input mute. Good, it hasn't dropped anything else. And let's move this macro away, just so it's a little bit easier to work with. And I want to connect this to of course I need to send losing it. I need to send a send terminal. We'll send that. I'll jump back round to my receive. And I'll recall that send because that's useless as a name. Inputs mute. Input mute state. Okay, use one. Perfect. So let's check whether that's working correctly. I'm getting value correctly through there. I'll need to do the same thing on mix, only this one's going to be a knob panel knob. We'll call that mix. And again, I need a send channel. That one's going to be called mix. Jump onto the panel. Just very quickly and simply, I move that away so I can get control of it. There we go. 0.5. I'll change that slightly. Perfect. And this knob needs to go to 2. But still not getting any delay, unfortunately. Let's try skipping that. So the problem is in the low pass filter. Constant. And that's because I haven't changed that. There we go. That should be fine now. So, we've got a delay. Very simple delay, but it's working. The next thing we really want to do is working a way to change the time of the delay. And we're just going to keep on working with this MIDI channel. Not MIDI, mono channel, at least to start with. And I call that D time. And there's two ways of thinking about this, and probably two ways of actually doing this. So we're going to need a stack macro because there's situations where I want to manually set the delay time, and there's situations where I want to have it synced to tempo. So that is called, well, it's not necessary to do this, but when you've got a situation where you want to sort of change the function of a knob intrinsically or change the display of how you are displaying information, then a stack macro is the way to go. And you did put in a few elements, so panel index, so you can tell Reaktor which panel you want to display in effect. I just need to remember where it is. There we go. Panel index. And I need an import for that. And we're going to use a list here. And our list is going to append and append again. There we go. That's going to be a manual, which is going to be very, very easy to set, and sync. And I'll relabel this time. And then there's a macro here, which is manual. Add a new macro called sync. A manual is simplicity itself. I just want panel with a knob, and that knob is going to go up to 1000, which will be in milliseconds. Terminal will have a straight output, and that will go to a send, which will be D time. And we need to pick one of the other times, if you see what I mean. So there needs to be a selector there. There's not going to be a curve, and I need to subtract as well, because this counts from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, whereas the list I've done goes from 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't do 0 counting. So if I subtract 1, then I will correct the scale. I'll rescale the signal from there to work also with selector, which isn't super useful, I have to say, from a Reaktor's point of view. It would be better if everything was sort of based from 0 or based from 1. It's a little confusing to have them all over the shop. That's going to be 2 ports as well. So in theory, the first of those 2 knobs should be working correctly. Let's get this panel sorted out a bit. Just for working with. Okay, let's hit play. And I've done something wrong with my interesting. I've clearly done something not quite right. Oh, I know. Potentially. That might be working now. Info. I'm screwing something up with my stack macros. Although it's difficult to know what. That's interesting. I get what's happened. It's because I've used this list. So if I change the values here to 0, there we go, and 1, the panel index is going from 1. Oh, I get it now. And that means I don't need to subtract, which is nice. So in theory, we should be able to modulate the time of our delay now. I need to connect the knob in the audio process. Connect to D time. Definitely working. Perfect. So that's manual time done, essentially. Let's attempt the slightly more complicated tempo sync. Okay, so tempo sync, we need to know the tempo that the sequencer is running at. And that is I think is this one here. No, not that. Tempo info. It'll be that one. Now let's see what scale we get this in. So we get this in beats per second. So this always confuses me. Unsurprisingly, we need to turn this into milliseconds. So if we take our sampling rate, we also need to know the sampling rate. If it's going to be, well, do we? Maybe not. Maybe not. I don't think we do need to know our sampling rate. So as you can see, I'm actually doing this in my head now. So math. Let's see, just for your argument's sake, what number I'm getting out of here. I think I should be getting at 120. I should be getting exactly 2. And in that case, I'll need to divide 1,000. Let's start here. I'm not saying this is right. I'm not a genius. I don't always get it right. Let's divide 1,000, which would be our time in milliseconds. 1 second in milliseconds. Math. Let's divide that by our tempo info. And I just want to get a readout on that at the moment. Not a meter, numeric readout I want. Perfect. .500, so that seems about right. Let's try upping the tempo. If I up the tempo, this number should get smaller. If I go to 60, it should be... Okay, so that's most of the way there, actually, I would say. Let's jump back to 120. So at 120, that's 1 beat. I think. Let's see how that sounds. And it will soon become apparent what's going on. Ooh. Terminal output. And we'll send that output into the selector. I'm going to jump back onto the panel. On sync. So let's go for manual to start with. That's definitely the manual time. Let's go to sync. And is that 1 beat? I hope it's 1 beat. Yeah, that's 1/4. That's 1/4 of a bar, 1/4, essentially. So to get different times, I need to manipulate the number that comes out of here. I'll get rid of the readout. I won't need that. And if I wanted 3 beats, no, let's think of it in a different way. Just trying to think of the best way of doing this in Reaktor. Well, I guess the way I would do this is to use a selector scanner. Put in a load of different ports. It's a bit messy. So I'm trying to figure out a good way to there's a much better way of doing this. I'll go for a list, and then I can do whatever I would like. So we'll go for 4 bars, 2 bars, 1 bar. Oh, that's a bit scruffy. So that's pretty clear. I need to change these values though, because this will be the output value of the list. So let's start with what I know. I'm doing beats already. Let's go for 1 there. And each time I'm going to double this, or half it, depending on which direction I go. So 4 bars is 16 beats. That makes perfect sense. And this would be 0.5 beats. A 16th is 0.25 beats, or a quarter of 1 beat, and then 1/32 will be 0.125. Perfect. So if I multiply the signal by that, that should be working now. I'm just going to make sure that the delay I've used, the signal length, is appropriate. The delay length is appropriate, that I've allocated enough memory in the delay to handle that length of delay. Yeah, so I'm going to boost that up to a 10-second delay. Otherwise I'll overrun the buffer. Let's jump onto the panel and see how that's working. So obviously I need to do some management of that. Make this a bit bigger. I'll lock that and we'll try using it. That's 1 beat. That's working. That's fine. And the next thing I like to do is to be able to change. I can never remember which number it is. So if that's a fraction, 1/16, 1/8, I like to be able to change the 1. If that makes sense. So I make it 3/16 or 3/8. And sometimes that's called dotted. But I also like to do things like 5/16 every so often. So let's jump back in here. And that's not difficult. I just need another list. And it's literally going to be like this. I can't think I'm going to need for much more than that, so I'm going to hit math, multiply again. I'll jump around to this panel. Ooh. There we go. Do a bit of gardening, as I call it. So I'm not even thinking at this point about layout at all. I'm literally just sort of plugging values in and getting the maths right. Oh, oh, oh. Unlock that. And I'm finding that hard to judge, so I'm going to open another file here. I'm going to get a kick drum and put it on the beat. Let's slow that down. Okay, and what we should be noticing is there's no difference between the dry signal there and the dry signal here. I only start losing dry signal further down. And there's no difference between the wet signal, between the far right and the mid table. Now tell me that isn't easier to mix with than what you have. I won't go there anymore. But you know what I mean. You know what I mean. Dropped another few streams, but nothing catastrophic this time. Okay, let's save that. And the next thing to do really is to let's check out input mute working. We could also have a dry mute as well, so we just get the wet signal. That can be useful. Let's set up the knobs for our filters. Well, in fact, let's try something a little bit smarter. Let's make it a stereo signal now. So if you see my previous video, you'll know that I have a crazy sketchy idea on how to do this, and I'm gonna just turn the voices up to 2 here. I'm gonna stop things being mono because I don't want them mono anymore. I want them stereo. And we'll deal with this little problem in a second. And then I go terminal from. And it's happy again. Cool. I'm just going to quickly wire this up and this is a way of making the routing slightly easier in some regards and slightly more difficult in others. All depends on your perspective. I don't think these are zero index, I can't remember. Let's see whether that works. Sounds hopeful. So we have a winner. Or nearly anyway. So something's fallen over down there. Why isn't that working? 0. Oh. There we go. Even with our flashy filter, we're only using 1.2, 1.3% CPU. That's fantastic. I need to sort of get the what am I even trying to say? I need to get a filter sound in there. Filter controls, even. So I'm going to reconnect LP cut, and that's going to kill the sound completely because obviously that's now on 0, which is full cut. So panel knob, and I'm going to make that. I'm going to use a numeric readout here just to help me get my scaling correct, because I want it to be able to open all the way. And the max is going to be about 136, which is higher than MIDI goes, I know. Where is it? Is it this one? I can never remember. Let's just get that going. I'll whiz these off. Nope, ain't that one. No, it's the other way around. I need the other one. Pitched frequency, that's the one I'm after. I'll make that mono just for a second, just to get it working correctly. And I'm trying to get to I'll tell you what, why have I never thought of this before? There's an easy way of doing this. Mono, let's make a constant value, create constant, and I want that to be 22050. Now what value does that say it is as a MIDI note? Only let me copy that. 136.7656. 36.7656. I think we'll call it 136.7. Hey, there we go. So now my filter opens all the way up to very nearly the Nyquist frequency. Let's just check that. At 44.1 anyway. £50 at that kind of frequency is not anything to worry about, I would suggest. And we'll send that like that. I'm on a channel again. I'll get rid of that numeric feed out, and I'm going to send that off. Into our audio process. Oh no, I need to rename it. LP cuts. There we go. Of course not. I'm losing it. This should be working about right now. Cool. And I just want numeric readout for the panel rather than the display of the knob. Make that always active. I'm going to make these always active too. I don't mean mono. What am I doing? There we go. So rather than have you, I don't want value visible on that one. And on that one, I don't want the label visible. There we go. I wonder if I can set that to just display integers. I bet I can. It's going to be in maths. Quantize. Step. Create constant 1. In. Out. Mono. Perfect. That's much better. Cool. So let's tidy that up just a little bit. Ideal. And we'll have to do the same thing to get the high pass filter set where we want it to be. But for today, I'm going to leave it there. That's quite a lot to take in one lesson. We've gone and done some pretty complicated things. We've got a mixed knob as we want it. We've got an input mute knob as we want it. We've done tempo syncing our delay. We've done manual delay. And we've got our filters working. I think it's a good place for day one. Obviously, we're nowhere near finished with this plugin at all. But as I say, this is going to be a long series to get in the right delay. I hope this is useful to you.